Greetings, one and all. I did a show a few years ago of magic and Gurdjieff, and I wanted to sort of continue that kind of subject of magic. You know, we all like a bit of magic. We all want a bit of magic in our lives. We've got the magicians that do the fancy tricks on stage, and then we've got the magicians out there doing their occult workings behind the scenes. And we want to be a magician in our own life so that we can create the spell that wakes us up and gets us out of here, because when we're asleep, we're under a spell. We're kept asleep to everything that's going on. It's like a hypnotism, which is what a lot of magicians use, is hypnotism. I've done shows on Gurdjieff and hypnotism, so check them out if you like what I do. And magic, what a wonderful thing it is. Don't we all want to be caught up in a magical world where we meet magical creatures and we can do magic and get what we want? Or are we just caught up in the spell that's been put on this world? And I wanted to read a little bit from All and Everything, Beelzebub's Tales by Gurdjieff. And he reminds us in the chapter in Russia about how we're all caught up in an exitless magic circle, because we just get caught up in going round and round doing the same old thing, thinking we're awake and we're actually asleep, and we can't seem to get out of what's going on. Many of us are too asleep to be able to think about getting out because we think this is how it should be. I'm just going to quote here, actually. It's a lot easier, isn't it, just to quote? So he's in Russia, Beelzebub, and he had to go to a ceremony that was going on in Russia, and he's with the top brass out there. Well, at this general state solemnity of the contemporary many-millioned community, to which came even he himself, as they call him, His Majesty the Emperor, there began there, in respect to my person, what is called Oret Staknil Karolni, which, generally speaking, always flows from the totality of the surrounding abnormalities, and being formed automatically in the psyche of every one of the free brain beings of this ill-starred planet, holds them, so to say, in an exitless magic circle. So Gurdjieff's using one of his words there, his magical words that he's put together. Oretstak Nilkarulni. Maybe I'm not saying that right, but the way it's spelled is OORETSTAKNILKAR And he's talking about how it's a special word for what is happening to everyone who's we're surrounded by abnormalities. We're not leading a normal life. We're leading an abnormal life in the way we live in this lunatic asylum, as he calls this world. And everyone thinks they're doing the right thing or struggling to get along. Or, we've said before about how people don't like to be told, well, actually, you're fast asleep and you're just going along with the flow. You're not really awake at all. Well, this is all part of the abnormalities. People think that they're being normal when actually they're being subnormal, abnormal. When you start being awake, you see suddenly how everything is just run by lunatics, as Gurdjieff reminds us over and over again. We're in a lunatic asylum, and that people are just caught up, they're trapped in a lifestyle that maybe they think's okay because they're being shown it by all their peers and they're being shown it on TV. We're reading in the newspapers, this is how we should be, and we're being advertised at all the time. You should be like this, and you need this to make your life better, blah, 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 blah. We're working on ourselves, doing the Gurdjieff work. We're trying to lift that vow, Isis's vow, so that we see life for what it really is. We're trying to wake up enough so that when we're looking out with our real eyes, and not these eyes that have been put under the spell and are now subjugated to following the recipe of the spell of just being caught up in the continuous momentum of how life is, and caught up in the flack of it all and the rat race. And when we can break that spell through awakening. And sometimes you get little glimpses of it when you're waking up. You suddenly see, oh God, this is ridiculous. And then, the next day you forget all the work you've done and you're caught up in real life again. Worrying about your job, worrying about your wages, worrying about how to pay the bills, worrying about your family, worrying about that mole you found on your leg or whatever. We get the spell passes over us. We can never quite break it. And I think very few people can break that spell properly and get out of this, as he calls it, the exitless magic circle that they're keeping us all in. Breaking free of that magical circle, you become the outsider, and the outsider then gets you either get ridiculed by the people that are asleep, or you get put on a pedestal and revered, and people try to imitate the person they put on the pedestal, but they can't quite do it because they're not quite putting in the effort that that person did that became awakened, because it's very hard to put effort in, and people like to be copycats rather than actually just doing the work properly. They follow other people down the path without doing, like I say, the work or understanding why they're doing it. They're just seeing like, oh, he's doing it, so I'm going to do it, or she's doing it, so I'm going to do it, because people imitate, they mimic others, and they think, humans are a herd. They follow whoever's in front. And sometimes I'm going to call them the outsiders, those that do kind of wake up a bit, that can shine a light and say, look, you don't have to live like this. You can live in a much better way of living. You can be much more awake. And they kind of lead the herd for a little while, and the herd tries it. But then when it doesn't work for them, the herd, because they don't have the effort to put in, or they haven't put the effort in, or they don't have the means to do it, or the centers that are all balanced, or they're only thinking of it from one way or feeling it from another way, they then turn against these outsiders because they feel disappointed in themselves, and they don't understand why that person has managed to wake up and be a true person, a real person. And it, well, put it bluntly, pisses them off, and normally they turn against them. People don't like being told that they're caught up in a exitless magic circle. They want to think that they're living their lives for themselves, and people don't want to realize that no, they're not. It's very hard to live your life for yourself. But some of these people that do try to imitate the outsiders, that have reached some kind of enlightenment, whatever stage it is, but they shine forth, they are different from most people because they've lifted that veil a little bit and can see through it and can see the real world and how to really be. Some people try to do a little cheating way of getting to it, what is known in the magical field as the old left-hand path. And Gurdjieff does write about that in his book, All and Everything, because he writes about all and everything. Did you get that, or is it too shiny? And he talks about it in the chapter when Beelzebub goes to America. And he talks about, he's talking about how people are doing conjuring tricks and doing investigations into supernatural phenomena and such like. I'm not sure if he's having a little dig at Rudolf Steiner here, but anyway, I'm just going to read from it. It is interesting to notice also that another professor of theirs, also famous, named Steiner, in the course of his what are called scientific investigations of supernatural phenomena, mathematically established that on the occasion when these chickens were served at these invitation dinners, always their owners would recite the same thing, namely every hostess, rolling her eyes to heaven and pointing to the chicken, would say with great feeling that it was the famous Pamir pheasant, and that it had been specially sent to them from Pamir by their dear nephew, who resided there as consul for their great fatherland. On that planet there exist in general conjuries for every possible kind of purpose. These conjuries began multiplying, particularly after many of the beings of this peculiar planet had become specialists in supernatural phenomena, and came to be called occultists, spiritualists, theosophists, violet magicians, chiromants, and so forth. Besides being able to create supernatural phenomena, these specialists also knew very well how to make the opaque look transparent. And as many of you know, I like a bit of Steiner, studied theosophy. I've looked into many different ways of trying to follow the path to truthfulness and to waking up, because I think everything has a little bit of truth in it, of the ancient wisdom. And it's the ancient wisdom that we're delving into here, of trying to awaken ourselves, because it's not a new thing. It's something people have been doing for millennia. This is what the mystery schools were doing and such like. But there are people that try and do it on, pick up a little bit of knowledge here and add a little bit of their own wisdom there, and then put a bit of their own ideas of what they've learned to it. 1 + 1 = 2, but with them, they're doing 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 2, which doesn't make sense, does it? But that's what I'm trying to say. Their magic doesn't always make sense, and they're conjuring, though it might be a short path to what they're trying to succeed at, does not necessarily succeed. And so perhaps it even recedes or holds them back, because they're not balancing all of themselves out. They're only using one center to go forward in a certain way. And Gurdjieff goes on saying, so he's talking about supernatural phenomena, which again, I investigate myself, and I recommend other people, if you're into that kind of thing, do it, but do put protection around yourself. Make sure you understand what supernatural phenomena is, as far as we can know, because it's supernatural and it's a phenomena, so we don't really know. But be careful what you conjure up. Be careful who you evoke. Be careful who you invoke, who you're bringing into yourself. I like to talk to, I don't talk to them, but I try to send my prayers to the angels and the archangels. When I do my own spiritual practices, I'm open to hear them voices, but I want to be, or them creatures, beings, beings even, sorry, I sound really disrespectful, them beings to come and talk to me. And maybe I feel like I get a sense of an answer, but we must be careful of what speaks to us, what they offer us, because I've sometimes found that other beings offer us what we want, but then after a few encounters with them, let's say, suddenly things start to change and things can get very dark indeed. So I myself, you've got to discover these things for yourself, or whether deep in your heart and in your conscience that kind of way is not right anyway. Shouldn't be dabbling with beings that could turn out to be demonic entities. We've got to feel in ourselves, in our heart, whether that is some kind of, whether it's a Christ consciousness coming to us, or a Buddhic consciousness to us, or an angelic consciousness. Is it in our heart? If it's in our head, I would say that's probably demonic of some kind. Anyway, Gurdjieff goes on to say, this same American prohibition of the consumption of alcohol can serve us yet again as an excellently illuminating example for understanding to what degree the possibilities for the crystallization of data for being reflection are atrophied in these contemporary responsible power-possessing beings, in respect of the fact that such an absurdity is being actually repeated there. And I'm sure many of you have realized that history repeats itself. People repeat themselves. I find that, myself looking through history and studying, let's say, politics or leaders of some kind, the same kinds of people keep coming around. And them kind of people get caught up in what they think's right for everybody. But the sheep are willing to follow whoever's leading just for a quiet life. And through doing that, no, I'm not going to say that, but what they do, they continue suffering, and they, woe is me, and moan about their suffering. As Gurdjieff reminds us, people love their suffering. rather than working on themselves to dispel that suffering and wake up so they can see what's really going on. It's just an easy life for them, which is why doing this kind of work is difficult. It is an ongoing process, but we're trying to do it so that we're not caught out by the magicians. We are not caught out by the spell that's put upon us. And at the same time, it's not necessarily a magician who practices spells and rituals that does it. People do it in their personality or the kind of person they are. You know, I'm sure you've all met people that are quite manipulating. You've probably all met people that live through a very angry way of life, which puts people on edge and ends up a lot of people that are quite angry turn into bullies, and people just do it for, again, for a quiet life. So it's another kind of form of magic, but not perhaps using a spell. They're kind of hypnotizing you into what they want. And I've said in other shows, you know, we've got to work on this for ourselves against making sure we're awake enough to see these kind of people's coming at us and see when we are like that with others. You know, it's very easy to tread on the weak, very easy to put down stupid people, very easy to lose our own tempers with people and, you know, misuse our anger. There are times when we do need to be angry, usually for a defensive purpose or whatever. There's kind of a two-way thing. Once we start looking at ourselves, we start seeing how people are being on the outside. But at the same time, I want people to try and be aware of how those in charge, supposedly of us humans, us nations, how they manipulate us and follow the same patterns. People get used to patterns as well. They see, you know, one president doing it that way, and then another president does it the same way, and they're just like, oh, well, it's, you know, it's something they're familiar with. People like familiarity. So I think what I wanted to do this little show all about was to try and remind you that the reason we're doing this work is to get out of the exitless magic circle. There is an exit for those with eyes to see, ears to hear, and those that put effort into doing it. So be magical, people.